We talked about how the leaders of Micah's day were cheating people just left and right. Really, I mean, it was bad. They were taking people's land, and I mean the land was a covenant deal. Didn't matter how much somebody owed you, you couldn't take their land. And nowadays, if you owe enough debt, and the bank owns your house, and you're making payments on it, you know, if you can't make the payment, then the bank would seize your house and go from there. And God's rule with Israel was you could not do that because the land was tied to the covenant, and so you just it went completely against God's law. And Micah saw all this stuff that was going on, and he spoke out against it and said, "No, this isn't right." And it was more than just like theft of land. I mean, they were just killing each other and stealing all kinds of different stuff. It was just the people that were in power were completely abusing their position and abusing the people that they were supposed to be watching out for. And Micah just said, no, this isn't right. And so we said to be a part of God's kingdom means to restore justice by speaking out for those who are helpless. If you go through the entire Bible, you see God continuously talking about how much he cares for the helpless, how much he cares for the people that are oppressed. If you go through the Old Testament law and God gives rules about divorce, is it because God's okay with the idea of divorce? No. I mean, God puts the rules of divorce in there because he knows people, and he knows that there's going to come a time when some people are going to sit there and say, because that was the culture at that point, was to just sit there and say, I just don't care for this person anymore, so I'm going to divorce her and I'm going to get the next girl. And to a certain extent, we still see that today, but in that culture, the bigger problem is that when a woman was left like that, it became incredibly hard for her to take care of herself at that point. And so God said, no, we're not going to do this. If you just all of a sudden decide, well, I just want to leave my wife, then you're going to write a certificate saying she had nothing to do with this. This was not her fault. And so that's why you see the example in John where Jesus goes to the woman at the well and says, bring back your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. And she says, you're right, you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the guy that you're with right now is not your husband. Because you have been abused by all these different men who have just married you, left you, and now you don't even want to go through that pain again. You're right, you don't have a husband right now. Okay? We see this where God puts rules in place about how they're to treat foreigners, that they're not allowed to mistreat foreigners because they were foreigners once. We see God talking about how you're supposed to handle people owing each other money, how they're supposed to handle children. Jesus specifically, people who try and take the kids away from him, he's like, no, I know you guys don't care for the kids, but I do. Heals the widow of Nain's son, brings him back from the dead so that he can help take care of his mom. And so we hear this all the time. Sodom and Gomorrah, God shows up not just because of the homosexuality thing, but because they were oppressing the people. They were just being violent to one another. And so this is a big theme for God, is that when he sees people treating others, especially the helpless, in a way that is harmful, he's going to step in. So this morning, let's go ahead and read through Micah chapter 3. And we started off over here last week, so we'll start over here with Holly and work our way around.
How many verses?
You know what? We'll just do our standard 2 verses each.
Yeah, Habakkuk or Shigana?
Micah chapter 3.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
And I said, listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel, should you not embrace justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones.
Who eat the flesh from my people and flay their skin from off them and break their bones in pieces and chop them up like meat in a pot, like a flashing cauldron. Then they will cry to the Lord, but he will not answer them. He will hide his face from them at that time, because they have made their deeds evil.
This is what the Lord says: As for the prophets who lead my people astray, they proclaim peace. If they have something to eat, they'll prepare to wage war against anyone who refuses to feed them. Therefore, night will come over you without vision, and darkness without divination. The sun will set for the prophets, and the day will go dark for them.
The seers will be ashamed in the divine disgrace. They will all cover their faces because there is no answer from God. But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, to Israel his sin. Hear this, you leaders of the house of Jacob, your rulers of this house of Israel, who despite injustice and distort all that is right. Build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness.
Her leaders judge the bribe, her priests teach for the peace, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, it's not the Lord among us. Oh, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us, therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble. The temple, the hill, mountain over ground thickets.
Okay. Was there anything in there that you guys saw, heard, had questions about, or thought was interesting?
I thought that chopping people up and
Yeah.
especially was pretty
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty graphic, right? All right, what else? All right. Yeah, and I mean that's a good place for us to start with, because that's the first point I wanted to go to. I mean, he's using some pretty vivid imagery there, and I mean it sounds disgusting, and that's exactly the goal that Micah is going for. He's trying to say, this is how disgusting your acts are. You know, I mean, these people are probably just looking at it as, oh, well, I'm just getting my money. And Micah is saying, no, you're doing more than that. This is how disgusting this act is. So one thing that we need to understand about the way that the system worked in that time is to go back to Exodus 18. Okay? Because in Exodus, what we see is Israel is able to escape Egypt. They they get thirsty and God provides water. They're hungry and God provides the food. They get attacked by a group and God rescues them from that. And then they finally have a moment of peace. And Moses' father-in-law shows up and spends some time with him. And during this time, Moses sits down. He's doing his thing. Apparently, it's a pretty normal custom where Moses sits down and the people all line up to bring their disputes to Moses. And I mean, Jethro is sitting here watching this, and he says, why are you doing this? And Moses says, well, I'm the only person they have to go to. And Jethro just kind of says, well, that's dumb. You know, this is a terrible setup, and you're going to exhaust yourself. You're never really going to get anything done. You need to put people in charge. Okay? And so kind of like how we have the Supreme Court, where there's, the head, and then there's all these different people that you have to go through to get to the Supreme Court. They essentially establish the same kind of thing with the judges there. So you've got all these different people that can handle either the smaller disputes all the way up to the biggest dispute, which will just go to Moses. And that continues on for some time. But these judges were just normal, everyday people that were just kind of, according to their region. And so eventually, I didn't know this until I was studying this week, but eventually what happens is apparently that is not working. And so Jehoshaphat, who's one of the better kings of Judah, says, okay, we're going to end this. We're just going to have paid judges. All right? We're just going to have people that are official judges. They don't do anything else. This is their job, is to judge and to take care of things. All right? Are there problems with both of those?
Yes.
What's the problem with both of those?
Say that again.
Sir? We've established that there's a problem with either way you do this, whether you've got just regional people that are, just family members, shepherd that occasionally takes time out of his schedule to judge, or a paid judge that does this all the time. What's the problem with either one of those? Yeah.
Because I think God wants us to ask help from Him.
He does. In this case, God puts these people in place so that they can, get these problems addressed, because it's not always just a matter of like something spiritual or anything like that, because those would usually go to Moses or one of the higher judges or anything like that. Some of these things are just like regional territory disputes or something like that. There's a common problem between both of these.
Judging in general.
Huh?
Judging in general.
How so? What do you mean? You're on the right track.
God's the only judge.
Nope. Okay. Sin, there we go. All right. The thing that we have to remember is that injustice doesn't just occur because of a faulty system. It's a hard issue. All right. It's not like there's rules in place to prevent injustice from occurring. There are. Injustice doesn't work like that, though. Injustice specifically goes around the law. It utilizes the power of the person in charge to sidestep the law and continue to do what the person in power wants. And so you can put all the rules and legislation and all these other different things in place to try and fix injustice, but at the end of the day, injustice isn't going to get fixed by a political system or by laws or anything else. It's going to be fixed when a person's heart is fixed. And that's what we have to remember and focus on. So let's go look back at verse 4. All right. So Micah says, then they, the unjust leaders, will cry out to the Lord, but He will not answer them. At that time, He will hide His face from them because of the evil that they have done. All right. So let's say Weston is a leader, and he is oppressing Aiden, and he's sitting there just constantly making rules that keep Aiden underneath Weston's authority. Weston is constantly taking more and more of Weston's property and everything else, up to the point where Weston just kind of says, oh, you don't have the money to pay me? Here, I'm going to take this boot right off of your foot here, and I'm going to sell that on the market so that I can continue to make money, okay? Now, if Weston gets to the point where all of a sudden he says, oh my goodness, I am a horrible person, and I should not be living like this, and decides, okay, I'm gonna get things straight. I'm gonna give my life to God, and then just right after he does that, and is about ready to go and start making restitution. He's about ready to go to Weston and say, I'm gonna buy you a brand new boot. I'm gonna get you the best surgery imaginable, actually, to heal your foot. I'm gonna restore all your land. I'm gonna take care of you, man. And just before he gets to do all this, Weston is dead. When Micah says here that God's going to ignore their cries for mercy and such, is that the kind of person that God is talking about?
We're going Wesson or Aiden.
Wesson.
No,
Why not?
because he changed his mind.
Exactly. Because he changed. Okay? We're not talking about somebody that changes their mind. When Micah says about them crying out to the Lord, they're not crying out to God saying, like they did in the book of Judges, where they would sit there and actually recognize, oh my goodness, we're horrible people and we're being just completely oppressed by these other countries. Let's give our lives back to God and get right. These are people that are basically, they're all of a sudden the trouble's going to come upon them. They're going, oh God, help us, but they don't want to change. Now we see this constantly throughout the prophets. Jeremiah consistently addressed this, where he was constantly saying, you guys are crying out to God. You're wanting God to step in and help, but you're not interested in doing anything about it yourselves. You're not actually interested in changing all these corrupt practices that you have. You just want God to come in and fix it. Okay? So this is what Micah is talking about here in verse 4. Jesus actually does a similar conversation in Luke when he's talking about the rich man and Lazarus, because the rich man had every opportunity to help Lazarus, who just sat and waited at his gate hoping that the rich man would take care of him. And it gets to the point where Jesus says that the sores on on Lazarus' skin were so bad that the dogs would come up and lick his sores for him. And it's this idea that the dogs had more compassion for him than the rich man did. And at the end, the rich man still doesn't do anything to help the guy, and then he's in torment while Lazarus is actually finally getting some relief in heaven. All right? And so the thing that we need to understand is that when we choose to ignore those in need, we neglect the command to love your neighbor as yourself. If we go to verse 5 and verse 11. So in verse 5, Micah calls out the false prophets for their true nature. He says, as for the prophets who lead my people astray, they proclaim peace if they have something to eat, but prepare to wage war against anyone who refuses to feed them. All right? So let's say Hudson is married, and Hudson comes up to me as a prophet, and he just decides, hey, I don't really like my wife anymore. I kind of want to go get connected with this lady over here. Can you make that happen so that I can leave my wife? And Hudson says, I'll give you a whole bag of gold for it. The prophets would sit there and go, happily. And they would come up with some kind of fabricated thing on why Hudson's current wife is no longer good, and she is to be stoned, or she needs to go, and Hudson's allowed to go and marry this new girl. You know, that's the way that they were treated. Happy to proclaim peace for anybody that gives them some money. But let's say Jabin is getting his land stolen out from underneath him left and right. And Jabin comes to me and says, I need this taken care of. You've got to tell this person this isn't right. I've tried saying something to him, but this goes against God's law. I need you to step in and to help me out here. The false prophets would sit there and go, what do you want to give me for it? Well, Jabin doesn't have any money because his land's being stolen out from underneath him, left and right. So Jabin says, I can't give you anything. Besides, you should be doing this anyways. You're a prophet. What kind of prophet are you if you're going to sit there and try and steal my money just to do your job? And the prophets would sit there and start proclaiming against Jabin, because they had said something bad to him. All right? And so that's what we're talking about. I mean, so it's Micah and Jeremiah and all these other different prophets that are actually doing what God's intending them to do, are trying to speak out against the false prophets. You know, they're sitting there saying, no, what you're doing isn't right. The false prophets, and we saw this in Jeremiah, would sit there and just go, no, that's not going to happen. You know, all these other different prophets are sitting there saying, doom is coming if you don't change your ways. And the equivalent of what the false prophets are saying to the rest of them is fake news. Right? They're basically just trying to sit there and say, no, that's not real. Don't listen to them. And it's just a complete dismissal of what's really going on. If you guys go to verse 11, it says, her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us. So all these corrupt leaders are sitting here trying to say, no, there's no reason that God would do anything against us. And a big part of their reasoning is because they look to the promise that God gave Abraham. All right? So what's in the promise? Yep. Land? Descendants? Blessing. There you go. All right. So God says, I'm going to, give you this land. I'm going to give you descendants to go so that you will fill the earth, and you will be a blessing to those around you, and I'll bless you. Right? Now the blessing is tied to the covenant. What's the first part of the covenant?
I know the last part.
All right, we'll come back to Kobe then for the last part. What's the first part? Parties involved. All right? So in the Old Testament covenant, it's God and Israel, right? So those are the people involved. What's the next part of the covenant?
What they have to do.
Yep. What they have to do, their responsibilities. All right, so God says, if you will be my people, then I will bless you. I will take care of your land. I will make sure that everything is taken care of, and you won't have to worry about a thing. Your responsibility is to what? To serve the Lord. And how do we serve God? Not yet. How do we serve God?
Following his commands.
Yeah, by obeying, by following his commands, by being a holy people. By making sure that we are God's people, we fulfill our responsibility. Okay? And in the Old Testament, there was the signature. As Kobe was. Did you actually say it yet? Nope, sorry. But that's what he was going to say.
No. You know what?
And so there was the signature. Okay? So, is Israel, are the leaders following their responsibilities? So did they get the blessing? No. But they were so caught up on the idea of blessing that they forgot about the fact that they had responsibilities they had to fulfill. All right? And so the thing here is that as God's people, we have to focus on what God expects from us just as much as we have to focus on what he's given us. We can't sit here as followers of Christ and just sit there and go, oh man, I feel so blessed by God because Jesus chose to die for me and I don't have to worry about sin or death or any of this other stuff anymore. Oh, that feels so good. while we're walking past the person that is suffering. We can't just ignore the people that are in need because of our focus on what God has done for us.
If you're gonna proclaim how blessed you are, why not proclaim the word of the Lord?
Yeah. I mean, even at that, we still have to make sure that, beyond that, we have to be able to actually go and physically help somebody, to actually take care of their needs. We've got to make sure that we're actually, if we see somebody that's thirsty or anything else, we've got to actually take care of that. Okay? All right. So, verse 8. Micah says, "But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, to Israel his sin." All right. So, do we have God's Spirit with us? Yes. Okay. How? How do we have God's Spirit?
Staying connected. The Holy Spirit. It's like when you get baptized, you get the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Yes. We have God's Spirit because we're baptized. All right. Why is it that at baptism we get the Spirit? Let's look at it this way. Because I feel like some of us are tired and maybe still recovering from sickness or games or whatever else. All right? All right. Most holy place, right? God's holy presence. If a priest was to sit there and walk in to God's holy presence,
Unholy, you die.
exactly. All right? So they had to consecrate themselves, right? They had to make sure that they were holy, that they were clean to enter God's presence. So, if we are sinful, if we don't have Christ, then we are what?
Unclean.
Huh?
Unclean.
Unholy. Unclean.
Christ.
Unholy. Can God's presence dwell within us while that's the case? No. What happens when we have Christ?
Good at it.
You're holy.
You're holy. All right? When you have Christ, His blood washes you clean. You're made holy, which means you have the Spirit. Okay? We have been made, if we're baptized, we're made clean by Christ. We have God's Spirit within us, and so we can do what needs to be done. We have the Holy Spirit. We don't have to speak on our own, but we can speak with God's strength. All right? You might see something happening and say, that's not right, and you might feel afraid to say something about it. You might sit there and go, I don't really want to deal with this or whatever, but you need to remember that you have God's strength working behind you. Gideon's getting ready to go and fight all the Midianites. He's got 300 people with him. How do you think he feels?
Scared.
Scared, absolutely. And it even says that God has to remind him again, look, if you're still scared, knowing that I'm with you, go up to the camp and listen to their conversations. And he gets there and they're having a conversation about how they're terrified of Gideon. Okay? And so that gives Gideon the strength that he needs to get out there and do what needs to be done. You guys can have comfort that you've got God's strength to get you through any of these challenges that you need to do. All right. Last thing I want to talk about today is this guy. Did any of you guys heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Okay. So Bonhoeffer was alive during World War II. He was in Germany. He was a Lutheran priest. And as the Germans were kind of taking control, as Hitler's party was taking control, they started going to all these different churches and basically saying, you are either going to endorse what we do from the pulpit, or we'll seize your property and all your members will go and be arrested. Okay? So some of these churches actually went along with it and just sat there and proclaimed, oh yes, Hitler's great. But Bonhoeffer and a few others actually spoke out against it. And so what they would do is he created this system of underground churches so that people could still worship God without having to feel like they had to be at these places and endorse what Hitler was doing because they knew it was wrong. So eventually Hitler's people find out about Bonhoeffer and what he's doing, and they say that they're going to arrest him, they're going to kill him. And so Bonhoeffer and his followers decide he needs to get out of the country. And so they send him off to England, and he's okay there. But as the war is coming upon a close, I mean, it's becoming clear that Germany's going to fall and the Allies are going to march in and take it. But Bonhoeffer feels conscience-stricken about being in London while his country is still suffering. And so he goes to his friends in England and he says, I'm going back. Like, what do you mean you're going back? They're going to kill you if you go back. And Bonhoeffer says that it's wrong for him to be in a position of safety while those that are there are suffering. And if he's going to minister to those people when things are resolved with the war, he's got to be there for them before things are done. And so Bonhoeffer actually sneaks back into Germany, reconnects with his churches, and he's found. He's eventually found by the German government. They put him in a concentration camp. And he's executed when the Allies are just like a day or two away from his concentration camp. I mean, they marched in there and liberated that camp a day or two late for Bonhoeffer. But the interesting thing about Bonhoeffer is that, I mean, when they pulled him out so they could go execute him, you know, there are these people there with him that were sad. And he said, for you, this is the end. For me, this is just the beginning. And as even the Nazi guards, they're going through the execution process, they're sitting here looking at him, and it was reported that they sat there and said, this guy's not afraid as he's going up to die. He had peace. Bonhoeffer knew exactly what needed to be done, that he needed to speak out against what was wrong, and he did it. And in the end, it cost him his life. But he didn't see that as a problem because he knew what the value was. If we're with God, then we're empowered and obligated to speak out and stop injustice. I think you could even argue that because we're empowered, or we're obligated because we're empowered, because God gives us the ability to put a stop to it, we have to. All right, tonight we're going to do our sweetheart banquet planning here at the building.